Good morning and welcome to the December 30th edition of the OBX Wave Report. It is another Friday, and what that means, as you guys know, it's a Friday for Future. Today is a Surf Friday for Future. We're going to do a lot of things here in the Outer Banks today, and one of them is going to be a winter surf session down at Jeanette's Pier. I'll take you guys down there with me and do a little brief wave report before we get into the water, and then we're going to do a little special Friday for Future edition at a local OBX business that is committed to a sustainable future and coastal defense here in the Outer Banks, and in my opinion, serves as a great example for climate action here on the Outer Banks and something that all the businesses here should be engaging in, and in my opinion, all residents should be engaging in as ambassadors for climate action. So we're going to go ahead and advocate for that on this Friday for Future. But before we get into all of that, in our supplemental reports, I'm going to do, as I do every day, provide for you the comprehensive weather, wave, and climate picture for the Outer Banks today, including both the United States and the North Atlantic. We're kind of going macro to go micro, or yeah, something like that. We're going to look at the big picture and then drill it down to the local picture, and then we're going to go back to the big picture, which is what we do. So once again, thank you for joining me at the OBX Wave Report, where we discuss all things waves, weather, climate, beach lifestyle, and surfing. All right, so let's get into it. Looking at the beautiful satellite picture provided by NOAA, we can see that conditions across most of the Outer Banks here in the center of the image are partly cloudy, but skies are still mainly, well, conditions, the air is clear. We've got a few high clouds drifting up above. Wind conditions are gentle. The temperature is warming up into the 50s and 60s for some locations. And so just very gorgeous weather conditions today, as was the case yesterday, following a powerful storm system, which left a lot of havoc and trouble in its wake. But the silver lining is that we've enjoyed some very nice conditions here in the Outer Banks for a number of days now. To our west, we do see a system here firing off just east of Texas and over Louisiana and the Mississippi River region. And that's going to bring some disturbed, unsettled weather for the southern states, southeastern states over this day. But for today, at least for the Outer Banks, the weather's going to be calm. Although we will see a little bit of a change in the weather come this weekend with a brief impulse of stormy conditions. And then as we get into January, it looks like things are going to get more stormy as well. And we're going to talk about that later. Looking at the infrared satellite picture, we do see those storms firing over Louisiana here with the bright cloud tops and the infrared showing up as bright red. So some tall storm clouds and likely thunderstorms down in those regions. Do check your local weather stations if you're down there in Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi, because there may be some severe weather warnings for those regions. Also, worth pointing out that the flow of moisture coming in along the Pacific in the northwest and central regions continues with heavy rains and heavy snows for the mountain regions. And this area here has received very heavy rains and very heavy snows lately, with these streams of moisture coming in off the Pacific Ocean. And it's worth noting that the Pacific Ocean in this region is much warmer than normal, so it's helping to provide lift in the atmosphere in that zone, and that enhances or tends to enhance precipitation amounts in storms coming off the Pacific. And of course, climate scientists and weather experts have recently observed severity changes in a number of storm systems that are linked to climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. So, for those of you in the Northwest and in California, it's important to recognize that these new, heavier precipitation totals do likely have a climate imprint on them. So, just an overall picture for the US, again in the satellite picture here in the infrared, and showing very clear conditions and very pleasant conditions here in the Outer Banks. It is worth noting that the frontal boundary, which had made a strikingly uniform feature yesterday, is twisting up a little bit with the influx of this low pressure system over Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi here, causing a lift in the front as also the jet stream drops down to tap into that Gulf moisture and this flow of moisture off the Pacific with the convergence of the cold air to the north and the warm air to the south. But you can see this zone here firing in the near equatorial regions of the Pacific, drifting up here toward the north and east through Mexico, draped across the southern sections of the Gulf of Mexico, and then out into the North Atlantic across Florida, and then running out into the central North Atlantic. So it's more of a zigzag pattern for this moisture flow zone, which we want to keep track of because that does provide a lot of fuel for storms. And you can see this storm system now in the central US tapping into that. Now, talking about some of the larger wave picture for the Outer Banks, I'm going to zoom out and talk more about the North Atlantic a little bit later, but talking about the wave picture specifically for the Outer Banks, in the near offshore region, we have waves ranging from about 3 to 4 feet in the near offshore region. It's interesting to note that the wave heights in the near offshore region, and let me make sure that this is updated. Yep. So in the near offshore region are in some cases smaller than the waves that are reported coming into local beaches. And this might be due to some enhancement effects from the sea bottom. We've got some locations on the Outer Banks right now showing waves in the range of 3 to 4 or even 4 to 5 feet. So waves are lining up very nicely to the coastline. These are gentle waves with a longer period and very glassy conditions. And they're lining up well so that some breaks are able to enhance the size of the waves, which is just kind of a nice thing to see here on the Outer Banks. Looking at some more specific locations here, we're going to do as we do every day, we're going to focus in on 3 specific locations for the Outer Banks. We're going to throw a little curveball at you guys on this Friday for Future Wave Report. So going over to Jeanette's Pier, which is a science and environmental station. Just yesterday, I was over there and they were talking about sea turtles off the U.S. East Coast and in particular off the Outer Banks. Sea turtles are one of the many marine creatures here along the Outer Banks that we are privileged to host, and to this is their coastline as well, and they require beaches as much as humans do for their habitation, and they're just wondrous creatures. I don't know about you, but I've always had a wonder for a feeling of connection to sea turtles. They're just I don't know, they're so interesting and peaceful, seemingly calm, and but at the same time also adventurous. They swim across vast regions of ocean every year to return here to these beaches over thousands, hundreds, and even thousands of miles. So they really are voyagers and journeyers and pioneers, as you were, for representatives for our glorious and wondrous Earth. So here at Jeanette's Pier today, the waves are presently in the range of 2 to 3 feet, so thigh to waist high, maybe some knee high waves in there. So 2 to 3 foot waves at Jeanette's Pier, with the primary swell coming in at 10 seconds and the secondary swell pretty weak there, coming in at 19 seconds. Winds are very light out of the north northeast at 4 miles per hour, which is a onshore flow, but you can barely feel it with those wind speeds down there in the range of about 4 miles per hour. So very calm, very pleasant down there at the coastline in the Jeanette's Pier region. The air temperature at Jeunesse Pier right now is 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The ocean water temperature is 54 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1 degree cooler than yesterday. Still going to need your cold weather protection here with the air and water temperature ranging in the 50s. The weather is partly cloudy, and the high temperature predicted for today is 59 degrees Fahrenheit, so getting up close to 60 today at Jeunette's Pier in the Nag's Head region. It looks like the satellite picture here got an update for more recent conditions. You can even see the point break, which forms to the south of the pier here, which is a good location for surfers. So it's actually interesting to see the Google satellite image update. So for our second location, we are going to throw a curveball at you guys, and we're going to go north up to Kill Devil Hills. So we're going to go on past Jockey's Ridge and into Kill Devil Hills Beach here. And we're going to go past the famous biscuits and porn. And we're just going to go, we're going to just pick a location here in Kill Devil Hills. I'm just going to zoom in on it. I don't have a specific location, but yeah, we'll pick the bathhouse beach here. So at Kill Devil Hills at present, the wave conditions are 2 to 4 feet and also very glassy, with the primary swell coming in at 10 seconds with those 2 to 4 foot waves, and 11 seconds for the secondary swell. Winds are out of the northeast as well at 6 miles per hour there. Very gentle as well, and the ocean conditions are quite glassy. The air temperature is 54 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ocean water temperature is 52. So even just a little bit to the north, you've got cooler waters just off of Kill Devil Hills. Interesting, showing that 2 degree difference just, I don't know, maybe 5 to 8 miles up the coastline from Jeanette's Pier there. And you get a big range of temperature along the Outer Banks from north to south. Weather conditions are partly cloudy with an expected high today in Kill Devil Hills of 57 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I picked Kill Devil Hills because we're going to be heading out there to visit a location, a business that I talked about earlier. We're going to, which is involved in some climate action for coastal defense. And I'm going to do a little feature on this business later on today for Friday for Future. All businesses should be pitching in at this point to help defend our coastlines. And I want to highlight this business because they're doing the right thing, and we want other businesses to get on board. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of businesses that are taking climate action, but it is a responsibility of businesses, individuals, governments, and any organization to pitch in now to defend our coastlines from the impacts of climate change and to defend our Earth from the impacts of climate change. We all rely on the Earth system and for the wealth and the wonder and the life supports that it provides. And so we should be doing everything we can to help to maintain a stable climate that is friendly to human habitation and to the Earth system and all the creatures that rely on it as well, that we derive so much joy and benefit from. So I'm going to highlight this business for you and later on today. So this is one of the reasons why we're focusing in on Kill Devil Hills. So for our third location today, we are going to head on down the coastline to the big wave spot of the Outer Banks, Buxton, which on any given day is likely to be seeing the largest surf conditions for the Outer Banks. So Here we are just near the Diamond Shoals location, and the Buxton beaches for our last location for the OBX wave report for our specific views of local conditions. And looking at Buxton right now, we have 4 to 5 foot waves. So waves at Buxton appear to be larger than the offshore swell conditions, which is something that is worth noting. Again, I would like to talk with an oceanographer, an ocean scientist, a coastal geographer to see what's going on there at Buxton. Why do Buxton waves seem to be so big? It's just a thing. Buxton seems big and wild and rough and kind of hairy, and honestly, from a surfer standpoint, maybe a little scary. But in any case, Buxton right now seeing those 4 to 5 foot waves with a primary swell coming in at 10 seconds and the secondary swell coming in at 12 seconds. Winds are out of the northeast at 10 miles per hour, so a little bit more brisk down there with the onshore flow. All of the east-facing beaches are seeing an onshore flow with those northeast to northeast winds coming in onshore. And the air temperature at Buxton is 64 degrees Fahrenheit, so considerably warmer than beaches to the north. And the ocean water temperature is also 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Ocean and air are thus the same for Buxton. And that's what we are seeing right now. Very warm conditions for this time of year in the atmosphere, and the ocean temperature is probably about average for this time of year just off Buxton. Weather conditions for Buxton are partly cloudy and an expected high today of 66 degrees Fahrenheit. That concludes our summary of local conditions for the Outer Banks for this Friday for future OBX wave report. I'm going to zoom back out now, and we are going to talk about the larger conditions affecting the Outer Banks over time, and then the larger North Atlantic Ocean as far as looking at the peak wave spots for the North Atlantic Ocean. But first, we are going to focus in on the Outer Banks and the national weather picture, as well as the forecast according to the Global Forecast System model summary. And the thing that I want to point out to you guys is that in the January 4 to January 11 or 12 timeframe in the models, and of course, you want to take all these forecasts with a grain of salt because we are at December 30th now, and even January 4th is about 6 days away. Model accuracy in the 6 day time frame, it can be quite high, but you still can tend to get some variance. So even in the closer portions of this model that we're looking at, it's still a little far out. And for that reason, I just want to emphasize that this forecast is likely not to be 100% accurate. It's likely not to be 90% accurate. It's more likely to be in the range of, say, 50, 60% accuracy, maybe a little bit more. The GFS model is a good model. I don't want to denigrate it in any way. It's a fantastic model. But what it is showing for us right now, and I guess the thing that I want to focus on is a tendency in the model in the January 4 to January 11th timeframe. I'm going to go ahead and advance the model so we can see this tendency. And let's stop it here at January 1. The weather patterns for the US to point out here on January 1 are a continuing influx of moisture for the US West from the Pacific, and a continuing tendency for fronts to approach the US East Coast and the Southeast, and for low pressure systems to develop in the region of these frontal zones. On January 1st, we have this low pressure system here predicted to develop over the Northeast and a frontal boundary draped over the US East Coast. I'm going to go ahead and advance the model and see what we get over the coming days. An impulse in the west moves across the central US and continues until it begins to tap some Gulf moisture. And here on January 3rd, we have that Gulf moisture firing in some unstable air across the central US Mississippi region with indicated severe weather for the central US and possible snows for North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. Let's go ahead and advance the model. So the energy for the low pressure system that formed over the central US as it sags southward. And then into late January 4, early January 5, it reaches near its furthest southern extent and then begins to gather steam near the coastline. And again, on January 5th, still just a stalled frontal boundary, but we're looking at some pretty squally weather here in the Outer Banks in association with the stalled frontal boundary. By midday on January 5th, we get a low pressure forming near the coastline in Georgia and South Carolina, southern South Carolina, southeastern South Carolina. And this impulse slowly drifts up the coastline to generate some stormy weather here in the Outer Banks. This again in the forecast on January 6th. Not an extremely powerful low pressure system in the range of 10-15. Nothing really to write home about, but persistent stormy conditions for the Outer Banks from January 4 to 6. And then the low backs up toward the coast again. So we continue to get consistent stormy conditions as the day progresses on January 6th. And this low is predicted to bounce around. You can see snows forming in the Appalachian region. And then later on January 6th, the system appears to get its act together a little bit better off the Carolina and Virginia Maritimes. And then we have a classic nor'easter hugging the coast in the mid-Atlantic on January 7th. Drifts offshore. And watch this thing. This is kind of funny. So it rides on up the coast. And then what do we have but a impulse here that lingers along the frontal boundary of stormy weather on January 8th. And then a low pressure system just drops right into it again on January 9th. And then we get another coastal low on later on January 9th. This one doesn't seem to hang around for as long. It heads on offshore. And then on January 10th, we have some lingering storminess off the coastline again. Lingering storminess off the coastline on January 11th. And then boom, in the lingering storminess, a low pressure system develops for another relatively light nor'easter kind of event on January 12th that intensifies as it moves on up the coast. Not extraordinarily intense. None of these lows are seeing pressures fall significantly below 1,000 millibars, so nothing really too crazy. Although here we have a 998 millibar storm forming off the East Coast again. So once again, a tendency for storm formation off the US East Coast. This one seems to want to just hang around on January 13th. I said January 4th through January 11th. Here we are on January 13th. So the tendency in the models is actually January 4th to probably at least January 14th. Here we have the low continuing to hang on off the US East Coast in a nor'easter kind of storm system. And you can see the low, so the lowest pressure here is to the north and east, but you see a second center forming here closer to the Outer Banks on late January 13th. And in a trough that kind of forms diagonally off the US East Coast with a flow coming in from the north and the northeast, a wind flow. And slowly this thing just creeps on offshore on the 14th. And then late on the 14th, you still see some stormy conditions lingering off the Outer Banks and the Mid-Atlantic with another impulse swooping on down through the US Southeast. What does this show us? It shows us a tendency for storm formation over the US Southeast, the US East Coast, and over the Atlantic Ocean near the US East Coast. This is something we want to keep an eye on, both for wave conditions and for storm conditions for the Outer Banks. It's a very interesting thing to look at, and this tendency is just something to keep a weather eye on. I don't think any of these storms that they're not showing up as anything too crazy in the GFS models, but but it does point to a very stormy or a stormier pattern for the Outer Banks in the January 4 to January 14 timeframe, and possibly running in through a good chunk of winter if this becomes an ongoing feature. Overall, for the Storm Prediction Center's forecasts for the Outer Banks, we're expected to see above normal temperatures and above normal precipitation in these storm systems that are predicted to form. Nothing too crazy in this forecast, but it's just worth noting. I also wanted to point out the jet stream. Right now, the jet stream is digging in as a trough through the central US in association with that stormy weather, firing through Louisiana and the Mississippi River Valley just east of Texas. And we also have a second trough forming in here through the central Atlantic and what appears to be a couple of storm systems swirling around up there in the central North Atlantic. Looking at the waves for the larger North Atlantic, the largest wave spots for significant wave heights are around 20 feet in the central North Atlantic. The near coastal waters of France and Spain coming in at between 15 and 20 feet as well. And then far, far up in the north, just northeast of Iceland at 24-foot significant wave heights. For the near coastal North Atlantic, we've got looks like 5 to 8 foot waves in the near coastal, 4 to 8 foot waves in the near coastal North Atlantic here. So just a general picture of the North Atlantic. And then looking at storm conditions, we've got a storm sweeping into Europe here and a broad area of stormy conditions in the central North Atlantic with a high pressure system hanging out over Bermuda, as we often do expect. So that's our wave report with all the various larger weather and climate conditions. I know we get into a lot of stuff with this OBX wave report. Maybe I should chop it up a little bit and try and simplify, but I like to look at all the things, and I really can't help myself. Um, so in any case, thank you for joining me for the OBX wave report. To sum up, we have beautiful wave conditions right now in the Outer Banks with waves ranging from 2 to 5 feet for most beaches. And in the mid to longer range forecast, we expect a shift to more stormy conditions here, albeit warm and stormy conditions, but with nothing too crazy yet predicted in any of the models, though there is a tendency for stormy conditions. So something to keep an eye on. And once again, thank you for joining me. And please remember on this Friday for Surfing Future to do all you can to save our coastlines from the ongoing and amplifying impacts of climate change driven primarily by fossil fuel burning. And I urge you all to do everything you can to rapidly shift to clean energy. That would be wind, water, solar, battery-based energy storage, electric vehicles, and in all of the zero emission source energies systems in use. So thank you once again, and I will be back with you